Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Investing in Science and Technology for the Future of U.S. Competitiveness. My name is John Bennett, and I'm editor-at-large at CQ Roll Call, where I've covered Washington's policy and political debates for nearly 2 decades. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Science and Technology Action Committee, for partnering with us to make this event possible. To kick off today's program, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sethuraman Panchanathan, Director of the National Science Foundation. Mr. Director, over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be able to be part of this event because how we invest in science and technology is essential to ensuring the nation's global competitiveness. So I want to thank CQ Roll Call and the Science and Technology Action Committee for hosting this critical discussion. Our economic and national security depend on 3 things: investing in the technology of the future, building innovation ecosystems throughout the nation, and developing all the talent that exists across the entire nation. And when you do that, you can foster innovation anywhere and ensure that there is opportunity everywhere. The first of those things we have already been doing for more than 70 years at NSF, and we are going to continue to make those investments in fundamental and basic research across the entire spectrum of science and engineering. But now we are at a critical point where 7 decades of investments have put us on a launch pad to tremendous possibilities going forward. Think of technologies like AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, advanced communications, or advanced manufacturing. The nations that fully harness these technologies will have huge advantages economically and geopolitically. To do this, we have to recommit ourselves to building on the investments we have made in science, engineering, and technology. We have to scale the investments we are making today to unleash the discoveries and breakthroughs that will define tomorrow. We have to see technological growth and entrepreneurial opportunities by building innovation ecosystems in every region of our nation. Good ideas are democratized. So we must have the infrastructure in place so that no matter where you are in the nation, you can take those ideas and turn them into new technology and big breakthroughs that can fuel our economy and bolster our communities. The way to do that is by building innovation ecosystems, places where researchers, educational institutions, businesses, industry, state and local governments, nonprofits, and communities that can all come together to identify important challenges and come up with solutions that improve people's lives and strengthen communities. Lastly, and most importantly, we have to quickly develop the domestic talent that is resident throughout the nation in every geographic area and every demographic background. There are millions of people across every part of the country that have the ability to succeed in STEM careers. I do not only mean as researchers or engineers. I mean the whole range of careers that rely on technical skills or advanced education or specialized knowledge and training. We need to do everything we can to make sure that they have access to the educational and career opportunities that are the foundation of our nation's future workforce. At NSF, we know how important these 3 pieces are because we sit right at the center of investing in exploratory and use-inspired research, supporting the transition from lab to market through programs like the America's Seed Fund, and strengthen education and workforce training across all STEM disciplines at every grade level. And it is a very exciting time at NSF right now. I would say every exciting time across our nation because we have just launched our first new directorate in more than 30 years, the Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. This new directorate will work with programs across NSF and with other federal agencies, industry, nonprofits, and more to expedite technology development in emerging areas that are crucial for the United States technological leadership and central to tackling the great issues of the day, like climate change and future pandemics. And we are thrilled that the White House's fiscal year 2023 budget request has proposed allocating more than $2 billion for this new directorate to invest in emerging industries, focus on priority areas such as advanced manufacturing, advanced wireless, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, microelectronics, and semiconductors, as well as quantum information science. I'm thrilled to see the tremendous bipartisan support for strengthening the nation's competitiveness in these areas. I'm looking forward to working with Congress to see the Bipartisan Innovation Act signed into law and securing the resources necessary to implement this important vision. Because when we do this, we are going to see that innovation can happen anywhere. And we're going to have opportunities everywhere. And that is how we ensure that United States remains the global leader in discovery, innovation, entrepreneurship, and technological advancements. Thank you again for the great work you're doing to highlight this issue, and I'm looking forward to hearing the insights from today's speakers. Thank you, John, and back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Panchanathan, for kicking us off with those great remarks. Next up, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Christina Johnson, president of The Ohio State University, Dr. Kay Husbands-Fealing, dean of the Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and Jordan Crenshaw. He's vice president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Technology Engagement Center. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thank you, John.
I wanted to kick off our discussion, and we can go around the panel and just talk about the major challenges in the STEM space right now. Is it workforce? Is it general funding? Is it R&D? Is it the China challenge? Or is it some combination of all of those? And I wanted to start off with Jordan with kind of the industry perspective. I think that's a perspective that in our reporting seems to be more and more important every day. The private sector, we hear calls for the private sector to be doing more. And Jordan, I wanted you to kick us off.
So, John, I think the answer is yes. There are many areas that are causing alarm when it comes to competitiveness, when it comes to technology from a global perspective. I think as we talk about R&D in particular, the private sector, its share of R&D spending has actually gone up significantly since the space race days. It's almost doubled since 1965. But the problem is that we still need a robust basic research ecosystem in the United States. And that's money that goes to universities to do the basic research that then can be applied and done at scale by industry. And it's part of the virtuous cycle of development. A couple examples, the federal government's role in basic research on the ARPANET leading to the internet, or some of the work being done at the University of Pennsylvania in the early part of this century on mRNA that was actually taken up by Moderna and Pfizer to become the coronavirus vaccine. So there is a virtuous cycle of research and an ecosystem that needs to be balanced and put in place. I think China is an issue. China is working to outspend us also when it comes to R&D. But we've also got other areas as well, too. We need to ensure that we have a high-skilled workforce in place, and whether that's done through immigration reform or increasing the talent pipeline here at home with STEM education, that's going to be vital for the 21st century. And then finally, there are other issues that we need to address that we need to do some basic investment in as well. One of those is the fact that we're experiencing a massive semiconductor shortage globally, and ensuring that we put the dollars and the right tax incentives into producing semiconductors that goes into all of the technological work that we do in terms of electronics in our economy, but also too making sure that we have the right tax incentives for research and development. So, John, it's really an all of the above approach when it comes to ensuring American leadership in this space.
Right. Dr. Johnson, that's quite the list that he just laid out. From your perspective, how would you, as our friends in the military would say, how would you rack and stack those? What do you think are the biggest ones? And what can Washington do, maybe do better? Washington can always do better from my perspective to help out the sector and to start addressing some of these challenges.
Well, thank you very much. And, Jordan, I think you nailed it in a lot of ways. So from a university perspective, and I'm sure Dean Husband's feeling is similar, is that we're in the education business. We're in providing the workforce of the future. And, I think about that workforce has become even more sophisticated since I was studying 40 years ago at Stanford in electrical engineering. But a couple things it would be better thinking about going backwards and then coming forward. So although Jordan said that, and it's true that private sector funding has doubled and increased since the moonshot days. I think if you look at specific industries like the semiconductor industry, if you go back to 1980, 1982, the private sector was funding about half of the R&D. It was the federal sector that really launched that industry. Today, the private sector is investing 20 times more than the public sector. So we need to continue to invest in, as Jordan said, basic research. I would say fundamental research, right? Because I don't think there's anything basic about the extraordinary work that's being done. But it takes a long time. So think about, you mentioned Moderna and mRNA. You can actually go back to the work of Tom Cech at the University of Colorado, Boulder, 78, won the Nobel Prize in the early 80s, or about 87. He was the first one to recognize that RNA had more of a role to play than just being a library with books on it, if you will. It actually could send messages. Think about that. Without that fundamental change in the role of RNA, you might not have vaccines today. And so that investment 40 years ago laid the groundwork for us to be able to turn this pandemic around. But if we go back to the importance that I know we heard from Director Panchanathan, we need to invest in the fundamental work. And we do that in life sciences through NIH. NIH has a very robust budget of $45 billion. But the National Science Foundation, which is really what's carrying the water on a lot of the systems work in both the physical and natural sciences, is about 8.5. Now, we just had announced 2 weeks ago a new directorate, the so-called TIPS, so Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. And that is something that can really fuel the next generation of these technologies that may not bear fruit for 20, 30, 40 years. So I think it's really important to have that. The second piece I would say about the National Science Foundation, they've really been leaders in workforce development. They're the first to say, let's reach out and let's combine the community colleges, the K through 12 with the research enterprise. And let's get these students really excited about research when they're young, because then they're going to go in and help fuel the future of these really interesting technologies. I think the last thing on workforce is we have to think about demographics and geographics. Demographics, Intel announced their million girl moonshot, which is to get a million girls involved in STEM. We need to look at underrepresented minorities, women. We really need to open up the joy of the STEM education to everyone. And then there's the geographics. For such a long period of time, we've relied on the coast, the West Coast, the East Coast. And I think you've seen with the Intel investment in Ohio, in Texas, that's really the new innovation hub, if you will, of the country. So looking for what the government can do and will do with the Bipartisan Innovation Act, I think it's to look at these regional innovation hubs, which is a brilliant idea, $10 billion to really get all the demographics and the geographics working towards continuing our prominence and eminence in science, technology, energy, engineering, and math.
Great, thanks. Dean Husband's feeling, we had a chat prior to this about the new NSF technology directorate. I know you have some thoughts on that. So I want you to talk a little bit about what that means, what role can that new office play, and also, of course, want to hear what you think are the biggest challenges as well.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, and Jordan and Christina both laid out a very robust sense of what do we need to do now. What do we need to do for science and engineering of the future? And the focus, I think, is on people, and therefore the talent pool. And that affects everything else that we're talking about. The focus is also on people in terms of our constituents. What do we want? What do we understand as important in our lives? And so one of the things that I did was I went back and I wanted to go through for the last maybe 10 to 15 years and look at what were the science advisors setting forth as priorities for our nation. And those items really do reflect what we want, not just scientists and engineers, not that's just us in the academy, so to speak, in universities and colleges, but really what do we need and what do we value as a nation? And it comes down to things like basic needs for the poor. It comes down to healthy lives, clean energy future, safe and secure United States, safe and secure world, public health, all of the things that you just heard Jordan and President Johnson talk about comes down to those values, things that we really care about. So from my perspective, focusing on the talent pool and a diverse talent pool, as we just heard, matters. And that is one of the things that we see at the National Science Foundation in one of the existing directorates, Education and Human Resources, but also is picked up quite a bit in technology and innovation partnerships. Those linkages, those partnerships, that title is just essential. Innovation is the tail end of the fundamental research that we just heard about. It's right. Where all of that meets the street, where it's commercialized, where it actually does provide the value that our citizens want out of our science and engineering system. And then these partnerships are essential, not just partnerships between, say, the government and private sector and philanthropic institutions, but it's also partnerships among different types of avenues for research. So one of the things that we see in STAC is that we are asking for that coordination across agencies so that we have the coordination within agencies, of course, and that's one of the things that TIP will do all across the directorates and within NSF and between NSF and corporate America and philanthropies and such. But also we're going to see, as Christina said earlier, the National Institutes of Health and things that can be done with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, with the National Science Foundation, with the Department of Energy, with those combinations, that coordination is essential. So that kind of diversity is important too. But last thing I'll say, because I started with people, not only people who are our constituents, the users, the ones that value what we do in science and engineering, but also the folks that need to be part of this engineering system, this science system. We all need to be part of that system. And it is a geographic distribution. We need broadband in rural America. We need broadband in the inner city. We need to have clean water in Flint. We need to have clean water in Appalachia. I mean, so you have to see it as, in my view, what do people value? And therefore, what is our science and engineering system providing for all of us?
Right.
That's why these investments are so important. There truly are investments, not just expenditures.
Sure. And Dean, speaking of investments, the House and Senate have been working on different versions of legislation that is designed to get at some of these challenges and continue investing. There is a difference between, of course, investing and spending, and critics will say that Congress in Washington spend too much and invest too little. So, the bills, this is headed to a conference committee. Congress, we'll see if they remember how to do a conference committee like this, but that's a little bit down the road. How well do these two bills, because they are similar, especially the technology provisions, there are a lot of similarities there. How well do these pieces of legislation, which will eventually become one, continue to invest in these areas that you guys have laid out? And also, are there deficiencies or places where the conference committee could improve the bills? And Dean, I'll go to you first.
Oh, Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go in reverse order on this.
Okay. Well, I know that Jordan's going to hit it out of the park here, but I think that there's a lot of room for both bills to be on the same page, of course, and making sure that the agenda serves all. That is the primary purpose. Investments, and truly, these are investments, as we heard earlier. Some of what has been funded 20, 30 years ago, we see in everyday lives. And those are the types of investments that really matter. We have to rely on the experts, quite frankly, to understand, well, we don't have a crystal ball. How will you know that this investment today is going to be beneficial in 5 years, in 20 years even? We do have an understanding, though, of how that ecosystem works and where it is wise to put those investments in. And I think both sides of both bills can address those items. And we have a system of trying to determine how to invest the funds wisely in centers, or is it by specific individuals? But we have a systematic way of doing so. It involves peer review. It involves working with communities. It involves the scientific workforce, but it involves STEM individuals that are in our workforce that are in STEM proximate areas. It involves, and one of the things I really appreciated about what President Johnson said, it involves community colleges, Research 2 and Research 1 universities, and again, back to engagement with communities. So I hope that both bills will also address how those funds are beneficial and span not just one area, but span these different areas that we value, but also means by which we can get about doing the business of this country within the science and engineering workforce. That is so essential.
Right. Dr. Johnson, what do you think of these two bills? And are there any areas where you think the conference committee could improve what's already been written?
I'm super excited about the Bipartisan Innovation Act and the conferencing. I think this is tremendous, and I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Senators Sherrod Brown and Rob Portman from the great state of Ohio and their work in bringing this together. You know, I think that Dean Husband's feeling said it just right on. The important bit, in my opinion, about this conferencing is that we create these regional hubs, because this is the hubs where they're basically mini Manhattan projects, right? Where we're going to get together and take on some of the big problems, and Dean's feeling went through many of them, and get after solving them in the way that we know as Americans how to do. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the CHIPS Act. When you think about in the last 30 years, and this is from the CEO of Intel's written testimony to the US Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, since 1990, we used to manufacture over a third of all the chips in the world. 30 years later, we're down by a third of that. We're at what, 12%? If that keeps going, the chip shortages we see now, which is why we can't have cars, why we don't have our endpoint devices, why we are really, everything has a chip in it, from tractors to your iPhone. If we can't get a hold of the chips, then that's really going to be a fundamental change in society. You're already seeing that happen now through the COVID. So I think that's important. And the last thing I would say is a pitch with regard to international competitiveness. I think what we need to do, and I've said this in every venue where I can, is I think we need to add a supplement to every grant in science, technology, engineering, math that would fund patents that would come out of that research. You know, if we're interested and concerned about being internationally competitive, we've got to file patents in those international countries. We've got to file them here. We don't have the funds at universities to fund that work. It would only be a few billion total across the enterprise, but that makes a big difference. So there you have it.
Okay. Jordan, over to you. I know industry follows a bill like this at every step of the way. So over at the chamber, how are you guys feeling about these bills? And like I've asked our other panelists, are there areas that where the chamber really wants the conferees to dig in and improve on the two products?
No, I think one of the most important things to this process, and given just the necessity to compete internationally, we need a bipartisan package, and it's for that reason that we in industry lean more toward the Senate side, that version of the legislation that was introduced.
Why is that? Why the Senate version?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, it actually provides the money. The House version really didn't provide it. And so when you're talking about investing, it's that $120 billion that's going to be invested in those key technology focus areas like artificial intelligence, advanced communications, biotech. You need the money there. And also, I think, as President Johnson mentioned, getting the funding for those, regional tech hubs is also going to be key. We need to make sure that everyone is included. It's not just Silicon Valley, and it's not just the East Coast that dominate this conversation. We want to make sure that the entire country is part of this. The CHIPS Act is also vital for passage. We need to have that to make sure that we can continue to compete. But I also think there are a lot more partisan pieces that are in the House bill dealing with things like outbound investment screening, some areas around the PRO Act that I don't necessarily think need to be addressed in this bill if we want to get to a bipartisan bill. I think we need to make sure, and the Senate bill also had some issues with the country of origin labeling that didn't really have a lot of debate as to what was going into that before it went into USICA. But fundamentally speaking, we need a bipartisan package that also addresses the core issues of research and development and competition. And if we can get rid of the extraneous pieces that are more partisan in nature, we need to focus on areas where we all can agree.
Right. Well, we are running out of time. This has been really great, but I want to go around maybe just yes or no and ask, like I said, because Congress hasn't done a lot of these really, policy heavy conferences other than, the National Defense Authorization Act really over the last decade. And it is an election year. It's a midterm election year. Do we think that Congress can get this, what is now a bipartisan bill, to President Biden's desk? As the jaded journalist in the room who's watched Congress closely, I'm going to go ahead and say I have my doubts that they can get this done. But I just want to get your thoughts before we get out of here. Jordan, what do you think?
The conference process will probably take at least a few weeks. The only problem I think we have right now is that we have a calendar that seems to end right before August in an election year. But, I'm still cautiously optimistic, but the calendar is coming up against us. So that's why we're pushing on Congress to move quickly. Definitely.
Dr. Johnson?
Absolutely. I believe in this country. I believe in democracy. I know they can get it done.
Okay. Dean Husband's feeling?
100% agreed with President Johnson. This has to happen. This will get done.
Okay. Optimism is not a currency that flows in Washington these days, but I appreciate that you guys are optimistic. Thank you all so much for your insights and for joining us today. Next, I'm going to give the floor to Jenny LeRae, Vice President of Strategy and Communications at Research America, who will be speaking with Dr. Keith Yamamoto, Vice Chancellor for Science Policy and Strategy at University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Sudha Parikh, CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Mary Woolley, President and CEO of Research America, to share their insights as board members of the Science and Technology Action Committee. Hi, Jenny. Thanks for moderating this discussion today.
Thanks, John. What a terrific conversation. I'm excited to be here with three of the co-chairs and founders of the Science Technology Action Committee, or STAC, Mary Woolley, Sudha Parikh, and Keith Yamamoto. The world faces unprecedented challenges, yet U.S. leadership in science and technology is falling behind. Is that why you created STAC 2 years ago? Keith, let's start with you.
Well, STAC highlighted 4 challenges that are indeed existential: environment and climate change, energy production, utilization and storage, food and water security, and of course, public health and healthcare, where pandemic preparedness is one critical element of need. Only transformative breakthroughs in science and technology will allow us to meet these challenges. We called on government to re-energize its commitment to U.S. leadership in science and technology, to motivate and enable those breakthroughs.
Thanks, Keith. Mary.
Well, COVID-19 has shined a light on the importance of science, that's for sure. Yet science has too often been taken for granted, emerging only in response to a crisis and then retreating to a back burner in terms of priorities. But in fact, science is more like national defense. Indeed, it is a defense of national health and prosperity and economic growth, and it should have the same level of priority in Washington year in and year out. In fact, 8 in 10 Americans across the political spectrum said in a very recent poll that investing in research is important to economic growth, and almost 90% said it's important for the US to be a global leader in science and technology. The Science and Technology Action Committee strongly believes that now is the time to realize those public expectations and drive science and technology forward.
Thanks, Mary. Let's hear from you, Sudip.
Thanks, Jenny. If you look at the share of our economy that's going to federal science and technology, we've been at a dangerously low place for years. It's less than 1% of GDP, compared to double that in the 1960s. China is not only catching up, many other countries in the world are catching up, but China itself has a goal to surpass the United States. And that is not good for the US economy, for our workforce, or for our national security.
Thanks, Sudip. So here's a question. The private sector's investment in science and technology has been growing, and it's substantial, surpassing that of the federal government. So what is the government's role in science and technology? Why do we need both? Mary, let's start with you.
Sure. Science and technology is, after all, an ecosystem in which different sectors play complementary and often interlocking roles. It's 3 Ds, if you will, of discovery, development, and delivery. The federal government is the first stop, for the most part, for basic science, that seed corn that's the necessary starting point for innovation.
Thanks, Mary. And Keith, what are your thoughts?
Mary's right, 3D, newly discovered knowledge about people and the universe that we inhabit is really the product of the basic research that Mary mentioned. Only government can support and maintain that effort. The new knowledge can then be developed by private industry. And although it's heartening that industry investment is increasing, today's global economy demands that government, academia, industry partnerships be formed that can de-risk the bold developments needed to address the big challenges.
Thanks, Keith. Sudip, I'm going to turn to you. What does STAC recommend at this juncture? Where are the opportunities?
We've got this opportunity. We've had an opportunity to enact once in a generation bipartisan policy. And that opportunity is coming to us through the competitiveness legislation. Leadership from both parties and in both chambers have pledged to go to conference and to complete the work. This legislation will enable us to better focus on a number of neglected scientific areas, and it's also going to bring opportunities to be part of the S&T economy to more communities around the country. That's incredibly important. More communities around the country taking part. We're also heartened to see significant increases for the National Science Foundation and other science agencies in the president's budget. It's an important down payment, but we're still going to have a long way to go because we're making up for years of neglect.
And if we fail to step up right now, what's at stake? Keith?
Well, at one level, we'll lose the opportunity to tap into countless ideas and innovations if we don't attract more people into the science and technology economy. We'll lose opportunities to create high-quality, good-paying jobs, and will continue to decline in the face of global competitiveness. More broadly, the challenges I mentioned at the beginning in health, climate, food and water, and energy threaten our national security, our economic and job security, our global leadership, our everyday lives. Basically, we can't afford to fail.
Mary, do you have some thoughts on that?
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, the Science and Technology Action Committee believes that what's at stake is the future. In the 20th century, the US was the dominant innovative force in the world, from the Wright brothers to stopping polio in its tracks, to Apollo, to the internet, and so much more. For all of the reasons shared by my colleagues and our panelists today, we simply must not wait any longer to seize the opportunities of the 21st century and meet the challenges and expectations of the public. We hope viewers will learn more about STAC and have their organizations and companies endorse the plan. Check out sciencetech.action.org.
Thanks, Mary. And in addition to thanking our viewers and asking them to learn more about STAC, I think we have another request, which is pretty timely right now. Sudip?
Thanks, Jenny. Look, as I said, this is a once in a generation opportunity. And our congressional leaders and the leaders in the administration have shown real leadership in getting us this close to the finish line on the Competitiveness Act and on further appropriations for science and technology. So I'd urge all of you to go to your elected representatives, give them the support they need, and urge them to pass and complete the Competitiveness Act, to get it over the finish line, and to ensure that we make that down payment in appropriations.
Sudip, Mary, Keith, thank you for your vision and the work you're doing with STAC. Now I'll turn it over to our moderator, John, to continue this very timely conversation.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Dr. Yamamoto, Dr. Parikh, and of course, thank you, Mary. Next up, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Sally Benson. She's Deputy Director for Energy at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and Dr. Jerry Richmond. She is Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the Department of Energy. Thank you both for joining me today. We've heard a lot about the China competition bills, and I want to get to that in a moment, but I want to start with getting the administration's perspective on the major challenges right now in the STEM sector. We've heard from industry, we've heard from academia, and we will hear from Capitol Hill in a moment. But I wanted to kind of walk through the administration's policies. Of course, it's budget week. President Biden's what some call first real budget for a new administration is the second budget that was released Monday. What are the priorities right now, and what do you need? What do you want to get done beyond the China bill in the appropriations process as this fiscal year heads to an end in September? And I want to start, Dr. Benson, kick us off.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, John. It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to start off focusing on STEM and STEM education. I come from a university that has a broad set of options for students, and what we're starting to see is that there's this massive movement towards computing science as sort of the STEM option of choice. And, computing science is great. And computing science is not only great in and of itself, but it actually has effects, throughout, the entire economy. So there are many ways to do that. But what we need to be able to do is to have students realize that there's a much broader diversity of choices available. I think about, things like the earth sciences, material sciences, chemistry, and so forth. And what we see is that it's not really clear to these young students, high school students, incoming college students, what the job choices are in America if you pursue that. So we really need to do some work in that regard, is make it clearer. If you start here, here's where you can go. The other thing is that students, fantastically, they're really passionate about the work they do. And many of them are motivated with two things. One is you want to have a good career, you want to make enough money to support a good lifestyle, but many of them are passionate for making a difference. And again, that sort of gets back to, is how do you articulate the case that if you major in chemistry, you can have a big impact on climate change or the environment. And again, that's not clear enough. And then finally, I work in energy. That's my world. And one of the things that's always surprising to me is the connection between climate solutions and energy is not really clear to people. So I think that the government, I think that we just have to get out the word. If you want to solve the climate problem, 80% of that is solving the energy problem. And how do you solve the energy problem? Well, you do STEM fields. You can do almost anything. It could be any field of engineering, any of the basic physical sciences, biological sciences. It doesn't matter. You can help transform the energy system, which is really the grand challenge, I think, for the 21st century. So that's sort of one challenge. I'll just say a couple more things. Retaining, we educate a lot of people in masters, PhDs. Actually, there's a huge investment that most STEM graduate degrees are funded because the students are doing research as part of their studies. And again, what we see is a lot of attrition. People will finish a STEM degree and get, again, frustrated. They don't really see the direct paths to impact. And so what I see is a lot of people shifting to say, oh, well, I want to work on policy because I can take my STEM knowledge and focus on policy. And that's a faster way to solve the, pressing problems that people are feeling. So I, when I think about this, I think it's really a symptom of a broader sort of a broken innovation ecosystem, in the United States. If we look at sort of the miracle that's occurring today where wind and solar and batteries and EVs, these are like the cheapest forms of energy and, battery prices have been slashed and so forth. Well, where were all those invented? Those were invented in America, right? In the 1950s, we had first solar panel, Bell Labs, on and on and on. All these things were, invented here, but we didn't go on and commercialize them, right? So they ended up being commercialized all over the world. And there you start setting up outside America this virtuous cycle of learning and doing and reinventing. And so students leaving college aren't seeing that there are all these great jobs for them in doing what their passions would have them pursue. So I think if we can fix that whole cycle, then we can get back where people are going to, vote with their feet and, stay in the STEM field. So I think it's a complicated set of issues. I think they're all solvable. And I think the administration, through its strong emphasis on rebuilding energy supply chains is, doing exactly what we need to do. And I think that's a good start. I'll stop there.
Okay. We've heard a lot during this event about the workforce and the challenges and some of the things that both Congress and the administration are doing. And Dr. Richmond, I wanted you to pick up there and kind of list your top challenges and what you see the administration doing to get at those.
Well, in terms of let me focus first on the workforce, building on what Sally has just articulated so well. And what really concerns me is that we're under investing in education at all levels in STEM fields, but it's not just colleges and universities, it's community colleges also. And I am concerned about the fact that a lot of the people that are going to be driving this engine with regards to fundamental research that's so necessary to development, to deployment, those are the ones that are getting masters and PhDs in science. And right now, we pay them minimum wage to go to do the research that's the underpinnings of all the things that we want. So we've got to have enough resources to be able to pay them a wage so that they can actually have a family while they're in graduate school, while they can actually start saving some money as they go further. And we know from research that we lose more women and underrepresented groups than certainly our majority groups, partly because they can't financially afford to do it. And right. We can't afford to do that anymore. But, beyond that, we at the Department of Energy are firmly committed to helping to build that workforce. But we also believe that competitiveness legislation like the Bipartisan Innovation Act is critical to tackle, as Sally mentioned, the supply chain disruptions and the inflation head on and lower prices for the middle class. So it means more in America and investments in domestic manufacturing and our economic strength so that we can now compete China and the rest of the world and build a more resilient economy to avoid the kind of shocks that we've seen recently in the last several weeks. And so we truly believe that what we're on now in the Department of Energy with this new build out that we have now in deployment, that we are uniquely poised to work on and make critical investments as well as critical knowledge in going all the way from discovery, basic science, to applications, to development, and to deployment. And we've got some phenomenal national labs to help us do that, as well as the folks at the universities that Sally and I are so used to being around.
Right. Well, dive into what I think has been one of the main themes of the event so far, and that is the two China competition bills that the House and Senate passed. The Senate, of course, acting this week, setting up a conference committee. And as I said on a previous panel, we'll see if Congress remembers how to do one of these conference committees outside of, maybe the National Defense Authorization Act, which November or December they come back to and push that through at the end of the year. But we haven't seen, a big sprawling policy bill. There, of course, there's spending in here too. We heard from the chamber saying that in the House bill, not all the money's there, but the Senate bill provides it. That's the kind of difference that the House and Senate Conference Committee will have to tackle in coming weeks. We don't even have conferees yet. We heard from our friend at the chamber who mentioned the legislative calendar. It's a long time between here and Election Day, but they're going on recess after next week. Memorial Day recess, July 4th recess, August recess. Then they have to come back, keep the government funded while they go run for re-election. So the legislative calendar is truncated. And I just want to talk about, I don't want to put you guys on the spot. I know the administration has skin in the game here. I definitely want to get a bill to the president's desk and have him sign it into law. But because Congress hasn't done this in a while, not successfully in a while, what can the administration do to help the conferees, once they get organized and start their work of trying to find a compromise? Because there are some big differences in the bills. What can the administration do? Dr. Richmond, how about you go first?
Well, I think it's really important, and the administration is certainly working hard on this, is really to get across the idea of how critically important this is right now. Right now, we are at a critical point, whether it be having to do with COVID, or whether it has to do with the fact, or chips, or also our key issue is climate change, right? And so we have to do this now. We are primed to have, with our resources, certainly in the Department of Energy, to move fast, but we've got to have the resources to do that. So, for example, in the chips area, we know that we need to have more chips in this country, but we also know we need to be on the forefront of developing new ones. And so that means we need to have the capabilities to do that. And then the Department of Energy, I don't think a lot of people realize it, but our DOE light source facilities are actually critical to that, and they're already built. They're already built. We are no longer in microelectronics, we are in nano electronics. And to be able to understand, for companies to be able to come in and use our facilities and be able to see how good their etch is, if we call it that, and how well these semiconductors work, they've got to have one of our big light sources that are like the size of a huge arena. And you can't just build those overnight, but they're ready to go. So it's important for Congress to realize we have assets now that with the funding, we could really move a lot faster on key issues that we need to address in this country.
Right. Dr. Benson, I just wanted to get your perspective. What can your office do to help the conferees along once they get organized and start trying to hammer these bills into one?
Yeah. So we focus on innovation. That's our seat at the table, and energy innovation, I think, is something that we can all agree on, that it helps our economy, it helps our national security, it helps our energy security, it helps our competitiveness, and it helps our environment. So, this is something that absolutely checks all boxes. And if we do it right, it can also make energy much more affordable. So I think we need to keep banging the drum that make the case that this is good for America. And, if we look over the next 30 years, if you lift the hood on the energy system 30 years from now, it's going to look radically different than the way it looks today. And this is the biggest opportunity, I think, of a generation to reinvest in becoming the world leaders. And, yes, we're great at inventing things, but we can't stop there. We have to invest in building it here in America. We have to become exports. And, just looking at one technology that we just had a White House summit on fusion energy. And you might be saying, what, fusion energy? But, it's actually remarkable. The Department of Energy scientists and have, made major breakthroughs in this technology. And if we sprint, and I think we can all agree that if we bring our forces together, we can sprint across the finish line. And the private sector is also eager to participate. They're investing billions of dollars just last year alone in trying to make it so America's first, and we become the leaders in this absolutely game-changing technology that will put us on a firm footing for the rest of the 21st century.
You mentioned participation, easy for me to say. And I'm just curious, the president's busy, of course, the conflict in Ukraine and still fighting against COVID and inflation. He's got a lot on his plate, but he has talked about these China competition bills and the need to get a bill to his desk. Will we see him lean in a little bit as the conferees get to work and not so much put pressure on them, but will he talk publicly about the importance of getting a compromise?
Well, I can say he's the president who loves science and who loves innovation and is doing more than we've seen in an enormous amount of time to rebuild the foundations of, the American economy using energy and climate change as one of those springboards. So I think we can be certain of that.
I also wanted to get into, there's been some mentions off and on during the event of clean energy and research and development in the clean energy space. Dr. Richmond and then Dr. Benson, talk a little bit about how the administration is trying to speed up research in the clean energy space, and what the private sector can do to help, what the universities can do to help, and just overall kind of really give this a jolt.
Well, we here at the Department of Energy, we got the big jolt with the infrastructure bill, which allows us now to take all these discoveries and take them further. And so what's really important for us is to make sure that we get that going faster. And that's why the bill is so important. And so we are really focused. I mean, we are, as the Secretary of Energy says, we are the solutions agency. We have capabilities to go all from the discovery, applied, develop all the way. And the way industry can get involved is to tell us exactly what they need, come and collaborate with us so that we can understand the kind of developments that can help them. I want to piggyback on something that Sally just said, and that is fusion. So, in order to get to this point where we can start to sprint, it took 40 years of very fundamental physics that most people would consider to be really esoteric, but it is not. It's what we've needed to be able to now sprint on fusion. So it really is a fabulous example of how putting money into basic research for us in the Office of Science is so critical, because those discoveries are what fuel the engine to get us all the way down the road. And it's not like a relay race, because that fundamental science has to be embedded all the way through the system when somebody in deployment realizes it's a problem. So we're just all on it with regards to a number of Earth shots, 3 Earth shots so far. And these are really taking on the biggest challenges that we've had with regards to clean energy.
Okay. Dr. Benson, you mentioned your office is the innovation office. So, what are you guys working on in this space, in the clean energy space, to, again, give it a jolt, a further jolt, and take it to the next level?
So we're focused on identifying these game changers that if successful, they'll make a big difference. So you've heard about fusion, of course, things like advanced nuclear reactors, hydrogen, electrofuels, this idea you could capture carbon dioxide from the air and then take clean energy and literally make a fuel and a carbon neutral fuel. So that's a big priority. Very long duration energy storage, so seasonal energy storage. Also carbon removal. You know, it's likely that there's going to be some emissions that we simply can't get rid of, but we can scrub them from the atmosphere and capture them and put them back underground or turn them into rocks or something like that. So those are the kind of priorities that we're focused on.
Okay, great. Yeah, I remember the president at the Ford plant in the electric pickup truck. I think, as an aide put it to me, driving like a bat out of hell. So I know this is this is important to the president. Where we've got about a minute and a half left with you folks, and I also wanted to talk about the importance of not just focusing on the East Coast and the West Coast for innovation and research. That's something that I know has bipartisan support, and Congress is working on that. I know the administration has stressed that. Talk a little bit about the challenge of doing that and using the federal funding and scattering it more across flyover country or the Southwest or down south. Dr. Benson, could you go first?
Yeah, gosh, I just don't see that as a challenge. I see it as a massive opportunity. And again, going back to energy, I mean, every part of the country has a different set of energy resources, a different workforce, a different set of preferences about the solutions that they think will work best for them. Where better to invent and deploy those than all across the country. I think that actually universities are little crucibles for climate solutions. You've got a passionate group of young people, you've got faculty. This is the place to bring all these disparate ideas and opinions together and really get on with solving the problem. And in the course of doing that, provide an example for communities and regions and states and so forth. So I think it's imperative. Let's do it.
Dr. Richmond, you get the final word about the importance of spreading the funding out.
Oh, it's critically important. And that's why we've already started programs to get into tribal communities as well as more rural areas and weatherization and other issues like that. It's critically important, and we're there because we've got our national labs all over the country, and they're spreading out their influence around the region too. So thank you.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Dr. Benson. Thank you, Dr. Richmond, for joining us. We really appreciate your insights today.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
To wrap up today's program, I'd like to welcome Representative Frank Lucas. The congressman represents Oklahoma's 3rd District, and he is the ranking member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Congressman Lucas, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
It's good to be with you, John, and being in the minority in the United States House, I'm kind of the conscience of this process. The Senate does things their own unique way. We in the House do our things in our own unique way. Right. And this is going to be an amazing conference process.
Well, I want to just dive right in because there's so much to talk about with these two bills. I wanted to ask, though, I know when the House version that eventually passed was released, despite what Speaker Pelosi says, it was in the middle of the night because I got up early the next day, and here was this sprawling bill that China Competition Plus, as we called it internally in our office for a little while. Do you still, I know you were frustrated after how that was handled. Do you still feel that frustration? Do you worry that frustration could bleed into the conference and maybe the compromise isn't as easy as it would have been otherwise?
First, let me say, John, Chairwoman Johnson and I worked very hard to prepare a package of 10 bills to improve American competitiveness. 10 bills that passed in bipartisan ways out of committee, everything from reauthorizing the National Science Foundation to reauthorizing the programs at the Department of Energy Research to NIST to a variety of things. And we saw our work product, well, it wasn't ignored, but let's just say it wasn't the way that it was put together somewhere in the leadership structure. Now we're about to go to conference. This is an opportunity for the legislative body to work its will to come up with a really good, long-standing product. I'm an old ag committee chairman. We do a farm bill every 5 years. We do it in a bipartisan way. We do it both chambers, and we ultimately get it signed into law. I'm a veteran of this knuckle dragging, knock down, drag out political kind of stuff.
Right.
I think we're in good position in the House, and we're ready to go. Matter of fact, later today, I think we'll see a votes that will start the process towards a conference. And we in the House, we're fired up. We're enthusiastic.
We've heard varying predictions earlier in this event about whether you guys remember how to do this. You make a very good point about your agriculture chairmanship and doing the farm bill. Do you think you can get there? Do you think you will get there and get a bill to the president's desk?
Yes, John. If you look at the things that we are ready to accomplish, and ultimately you've got to have a strategic bipartisan bill. It'll pass both chambers, be signed by the president. That means focusing on areas of broad agreement in basic research and competitiveness. If we'll do that, if our Senate colleagues will work with us in that regard, if leadership in the majority will allow House members to be a part of that process, then I think we can get there. There's a lot of things, Johns, we already agree on. The $42 billion allocation towards the CHIP Act, which was authorized in NDAA. We all agree we have to get back in to basic manufacturing of this critical component. We all agree we need to invest more in the National Science Foundation and to create a new tech directorate to help improve use-inspired research. We need to invest more in the Department of Energy. Now, John, in fairness, there's some other areas. Much to my regret in the House, the majority's not chosen to move forward a NASA reauthorization. And that's a part of the Senate bill. So we'll have to work our way through that. How we invest in the National Science Foundation. Again, we passed a full authorization in the House for both NSF and DOE. I think we provide guidance and focus. And I would argue where some people say perhaps we didn't spend enough money in the House, if you look at what we reauthorize, over the next 5 years, we propose to double the spending at the National Science Foundation to $78 billion, double the spending at the Department of Energy research programs to $50 billion, double the NIST spending to $7 billion. Our perspective in the House was they could only absorb and utilize so much money efficiently. This is a town where when something becomes a cool idea, people want to throw everything imaginable at it. That's not the way you manage resources to maximum possible return. So
right.
I think we can make it happen. It's going to be hard. I hope leadership on both sides of the building will let this conference committee do its work. I know we can work in a bipartisan way on the House side of the equation and the Science Committee if we're allowed to. But there are also several other committees that have pieces of this pie too, John. This is going to be a great big old conference committee. If we have formal conferences, think of pictures from Yalta in 1945 and the great big table and everybody
right.
around it. It'll be that kind of an effort, but it'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. We cannot continue to let our competition around the world outspend us, outinvest us, and then at the same time steal our ideas or utilize our resources that we've developed. We've got to push forward, John.
Sure. Are there things in the Senate version or even in the version that eventually passed the House that are just, to use an overused term these days, a red line for your side?
Oh, we've looked at 50 or 60 or 70 particular items in the Senate bill that may be, if they're going to be in the final language, have to be dramatically refined or focused. Again, as I acknowledge on NASA, there's some areas where the House is running behind that we've got to catch up. My perspective going into a conference committee is that everything's on the table. Every committee and both chambers, majority and minority, are going to have a place in the struggle, as we do in the Farm Bill process.
Sure.
If we're allowed to work our way through this, we'll get to a final product. It won't be days or weeks. It might take a month or two, or it might take longer than that. But we want a final product that will stand the test of time and will not create problems on down the road. Again, as the House did by doubling, not tripling or quadrupling, budgets at a variety of research institutions. We're trying to provide the resources they can absorb. Let's not have a boom in spending and then in a Congress or two see the money go away. That's devastating to the scientific community. That's devastating to the research community. We have to avoid that boom and bust kind of a perspective that Congress tends to have these days.
Right. speaking of Congress these days, it seems like the pay-fors, the offsets, oftentimes are the hardest part of the negotiation. We may see that soon with a COVID aid bill. I think we're seeing it already with the COVID bill. The money, the additional money in the Senate bill, would you guys demand that be offset, even if the number comes down?
I would suggest to you that in the House of Representatives, we're always focused on the overall budget effect. We're always focused on how it will impact the economy.
Right.
We don't want to create more inflation than we already have in the national economy because of a variety of issues. But that list have to be part of the equation. Ultimately, we need to achieve consensus on the things that we can agree on, be able to move forward on those items, decide. And there will be items in the Senate package, I think we in the House, at least on my side of the Science Committee, will want to keep. We'll work to make sure that happens, and we'll address the things that perhaps in both packages shouldn't be there. But it's going to be a long slog. Again, I've been through this many times on the Farm Bill. I know how important it is to get to a final product and one that will stand the test of time. Our competitors around the world are eating our lunch. We have to take this opportunity, this national focus. How often do you have the major leadership on both sides of the building decide they want to support something with this intensity? I wish it had happened 9 months ago. I won't deny that to you, John, but I'm happy we're to this point, and I think we can make something happen. Just got to roll up our sleeves and work, and not scream about it, not shout about it.
Right.
Physically work to get to the final product.
Right. You have, do you have a timeline in mind? It looks like there's a lot of time left in the year, but the legislative calendar, you've got a number of recesses. Then, it's midterm campaign homestretch. So do you think you need to have this done when both chambers leave for the August recess?
I don't know that I can put that type of time limit on it. I would tell you that if we are willing to accommodate each other and work sincerely, we can get there sooner than later. But it has to be done, however long it takes. It has to be done.
Okay, last question, and we'll get you out of here on this. The president has talked about these bills off and on. He's got a lot on his plate with the crisis in Ukraine, inflation, still battling COVID. Would it help the conferees or hurt the conferees if the president leaned in, did some travel, did some speeches as you guys do your work?
I think encouraging certain members of the House and the Senate to focus on this, especially within his own party, is a good idea. But remember the Constitution. Congress creates the legislation. The president simply signs and implements, or vetoes, signs and implements the legislation. It's our responsibility to put a good legislative product on his desk.
Right. Well, we at CQ Roll Call will be following this very closely. We look forward to talking to you again. And thank you for joining us today, Congressman.
Absolutely, John.
That wraps up today's event. Thank you to our sponsors for joining us and our speakers, of course, for joining us for this important and timely discussion, and to the Science and Technology Action Committee for making today's dialogue possible. If you missed any portion of today's program, it will be available on rollcall.com and Roll Call's YouTube and Facebook pages. Enjoy the rest of your day.